Hi, welcome to Week in Review, where we look at some of the news making headlines. I'm joined this week by a different cast of characters than normal. I got Ben Felder here, we've got Graham Brewer, and a surprise appearance by Jenny Carlson.
Surprise to me too.
So, welcome aboard. I'm Phil O'Connor, the Live Enterprise Director. Let's get to some of the headlines. Ben, news out of the state capitol this week, another lawmaker in trouble.
Yeah, Senator Kyle Loveless, a Republican out of the Mustang and South Oklahoma City area. It was reported a couple months ago by the Oklahomans, Nolan Clay, that there were some discrepancies in his campaign finance reporting, which means basically that we saw that some PACs had reported giving money to his campaign. He hadn't reported receiving it, which always kind of raises a red flag. Where's that money? Lawmakers, candidates for office aren't allowed to use their political campaign funds for personal use. It's under investigation in Oklahoma County, and yesterday Loveless announced that he was resigning. He didn't admit to specific wrongdoing, but did say that there may have been some mistakes, and I take full responsibility for those, or at least they only rest with me. And so that's 3 state senators in the last 2 years that have resigned. You've got a few more House members that are also vacated their seat. So yeah, we're kind of on a run right now. I think I looked at it yesterday that there's 160,000 Oklahomans that right now don't have a representative in the Senate.
Any indication of what happened with the money?
No, not really. I mean, it's under investigation. I mean, in situations like this, there's always maybe kind of a theory that using it for personal use, which you're not allowed to do anything from, shopping for, personal items, putting towards your home expenses. You are allowed to use the money, obviously, for campaign functions and for, general expenses related to, campaigning in the office. So, if you're traveling around the state or around your district, you can use that for gas, you can use it for mailers, and there's a little bit of leeway and other things you can use it for, renting out an event hall. I've even seen some that use it for other space rentals or property, but you couldn't put it down for a down payment on your house. You couldn't use it for tickets to a Thunder game and those things like that.
Interesting that Kyle Loveless finds himself askew with the law. He was the state senator that was pushing for reform of the
civil asset forfeiture. Yeah, it was really kind of the big spokesman on this matter, and really pushing for reform
and making some enemies among the district attorneys.
Yeah, for a lot of district attorneys, a lot of law enforcement agencies across the state, this is kind of a form of revenue. I don't think they'd call it that, but when a sheriff pulls you over and maybe a suspected drug bust and a bunch of cash in the back seat of the car, I mean, they collect that, and those goes towards different operational expenses at times. Loveless really kind of beat the drum on wanting to bring some reform to this matter, and so you're right, it's not necessarily something that's going to be embraced wholeheartedly by law enforcement.
Now, you mentioned there'll be a special election to replace Kyle Loveless. Apparently, right?
There will be. I mean, we don't know the details on that. We do have a special election for a House seat that Representative Newell, who resigned, he resigned just, I think a week or two or maybe a month after the election last year. This is a seat in Seminole, Oklahoma, and we've had a primary election, and then May, I think it's May 9th, but don't hold me to that. Early May is going to be the general election for that seat. So that kind of just gives you an idea. It takes a little bit of time. The governor will have to call for a special one.
And takes a little bit of money.
Yeah,
I'm wondering how much we're spending on all these special
definitely.
elections.
I think, just look at the political implications for a second. All these recent resignations have been from Republicans. That's not too odd. I mean, they hold a large majority status, so the odds are in that favor. But Democrats have had some success when they have a candidate who runs and loses, and then in a year or two later, there's an open seat. We saw that with Cindy Munson. We saw that with Colin Waukee. Loveless had a Democratic challenger that he beat pretty handily, but it'll be interesting to see if that person decides to run again, maybe as the person that's able to accelerate their campaign or be the front runner.
And has anybody announced that they're interested in?
I have not heard. I mean,
okay.
I have not heard that.
Okay. Then on another matter at the Capitol, the teacher pay issue, which was sort of supposed to be the end-all, be-all of this whole session. Now there's concerns that it may not even be passed in any form.
Teacher pay was a big theme coming out of the elections. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle said that we wanted to do something about addressing Oklahoma's status as one of the worst, if not the worst, in terms of average teacher pay. You saw a handful of bills that were filed. We kind of whittled our way down to 2. The House had a bill that was called the 1-2-3 raise plan, which would raise teacher pay by $6,000 in a 3-year span. The House had a 4% raise. Well, we hit a deadline yesterday. Neither of those bills had been heard by the other chamber, so pretty much effectively kills those bills. Now, the teacher pay is on life support. It's not completely dead. It's maybe down 3 games to 1. Leadership of both House and Senate have the ability to introduce new legislation at this point. But the fact that they did not meet this deadline means that House and Senate are already not in an agreement on how best to fund a teacher pay raise plan, because you have to put together the actual plan and then you have to fund it. And right now that's a tough thing to do with a nearly $900 million budget shortfall. So there's still some hope before the session ends May 26, I believe. But there's not a lot of hope given the fact that the deadline passed without agreement between both chambers, which is what it's going to take to get it through.
And with all the power that the teachers wielded in that last election, I mean, it was a central issue. And if that doesn't get addressed, I got to think there's going to be some heavy political fallout. For
Definitely, but with education right now, there are 2 buckets. There's the teacher pay issue, and then there's just general education funding, and that in and of itself is right now in a big world of hurt and a lot of unknown going forward, as is the case with lots of state agencies right now. And I would have to imagine that the legislature, they may try to tackle a teacher pay raise in the next few weeks, but it's likely that they're going to say, hey, filling this budget hole is our #1 priority. The State Department of Ed is saying, we're for a teacher pay raise plan, but we also need to address, the budget hole that we're facing as an agency and in our schools that are, hoping not to see another year of cuts.
Right. So we've got another week left to watch what they do. We'll keep an eye on that. Graham, more news sort of out of the Capitol this week. Big report on the death penalty and how Oklahoma applies it. And the news, again, wasn't really very good for Oklahoma.
No, it doesn't look like we're going to be. I mean, obviously we're in a holding pattern right now, a court order that halted all of our executions has been going on for more than a year. It's the longest gap we've had in executions in the state since the mid-'90s. But this report certainly doesn't suggest that we should be rushing to get back to that practice anymore. There's
identified a lot of flaws in the system.
There was 46 recommendations. This report was put together by a bipartisan group of advocates, lawmakers, judges, attorneys, all sorts of people. Former Governor Brad Henry, former Speaker of the House Chris Steele were members. And Governor Henry was pretty forceful in his opinion that the state needs to continue this moratorium. They cited issues with types of testimony that are admissible, specifically eyewitness and forensic testimony, where the state hasn't really caught up with advances. Jury instruction is lacking, judge training is lacking. They want to see law enforcement use different types of interrogation techniques that would stop false confessions, which is a problem in a lot of capital cases across the United States. But it also had obviously a lot of concerns about how it's administered, who should be eligible for it, specifically mental health requirements. They want to avoid executing the mentally ill, which the Supreme Court has found unconstitutional. And a lot of the commission members has expressed a lot of concern that there's a very real possibility that we could put innocent people on death row.
What was the reaction to the report? I mean, what did you hear from lawmakers or the governor or anybody along those lines? I mean, are they embracing it, or are they pushing back against it, or what are they saying?
A lot of people on the state side are reluctant to comment on it. I don't think that there's a lot in the report that anyone thought was surprising. I mean, a lot of these problems have been documented for years. This isn't the first study that the state has had on the death penalty or the criminal justice system that's highlighted a litany of issues that legal experts have been arguing for years need to change. The Department of Corrections is still finalizing its execution protocol, so it's reluctant to speak about that. The Attorney General's office has said that that they want to continue the practice and they're looking forward to moving forward on future executions. But I think that you still have to keep in mind the fact that once the new protocol is decided on, the Attorney General office does sign off on it and says that they think it's constitutional and humane. Attorneys for those people on death row are going to be litigating it pretty heavily. There's always going to be challenges to new execution protocol, and so I assume that that's what's going to happen here. Plus, former Attorney General Scott Pruitt said that whenever that protocol is put in place and decided upon, that his office would wait 150 days before seeking a new execution date. So we're not looking at having executions in Oklahoma anytime in the near future.
Great. So we have this whole issue of criminal justice reform going on, a lot of things coming out. We're looking at the death penalty, we're looking at all sorts of sentencing issues and stuff. There was another big report released this week by the director of prisons, essentially pointing out that Oklahoma is now again at a new all-time high for prison
Correct.
inmates.
With 62,000 individuals in the system as a whole, about 26,000 of those are actually incarcerated individuals. The majority of the rest are on probation, parole, GPS monitoring, things like that. But Alba is correct. It's a record. We've never had that many people in the system. Some of my reporting's highlighted the system is overburdened in so many different levels. Just infrastructure needs alone are incredibly lacking. And Director Alba asked the state legislature for $1.6 billion in appropriations this year. He said, if we can either fix criminal justice or we can start building new prisons. And right now, I don't see any real political will to change the system. So, but of course, he wasn't given that budgetary needs on the state level. The Department of Corrections was lucky just to keep a flat budget of $484 million.
And he's essentially asking for 2 new medium security prisons.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't have a lot of room. He's at 109% capacity, and I don't think the department's been able to staff their prisons at more than 70% in decades.
And this is at a time when the state is looking to cut its prison population.
Right.
So.
I mean, there's obviously the will of the people there that voted for 781 and 80 last year. But again, you see in the legislature, there's even some pushback on those voter-approved measures. So it's always been a tough battle for criminal justice reform efforts in the state. And despite the population growing and the death penalty report, I think that's still going to continue to be the case.
Well, let's talk about something that's a little bit less serious and a little bit more fun. Well, maybe not so much fun. The Thunder are done.
Yes.
The season has come to a crashing halt.
And some people would say that is serious business. Not in the vein of this serious business, but right.
What happened, Jenny?
Well, I think in the case of this series against Houston, I think the Rockets just had better players. I mean, we saw the Thunder really did play well in a vast majority of these games. I mean, 4 of the 5 games you had the Thunder leading or in contention to win those games. Game 1 being the exception. They really kind of crashed and burned, to borrow your phrase, Phil, crashed and burned there in the second half. But really the other 4 games, they were in the mix. But you look at what Houston was able to do, especially with their bench players. They only played 8 guys. They would have played 9 if Sam Decker, another reserve, hadn't been injured late in the regular season, but only played 8 guys. But really, those 3 guys off the bench just were better players than the Thunder could bring off their bench to go against who Houston had out there. And when Russell Westbrook came off the court, which he had to come off the court, we saw him play valiantly. He played a ton of minutes in the regular season and then played a ton of minutes in the postseason, but he just couldn't be out there every minute. He had to rest at some point. And when he came off the floor, the Thunder just wasn't good enough. They weren't good enough to contend with what Houston had, and ultimately that was the downfall. So now into the offseason, Thunder has to be looking at ways to improve those reserve guys because their starters were good enough. Their starters were better than Houston starters. The numbers are there, but the reserves just weren't as good.
Ben, how's your jump shot?
I don't know if I'd add anything.
Could you be a reserve point guard? Because that is a real big concern for this team right now. If either of you guys could play point guard, I think you might get the call.
No? Both out? Okay. Other fun stuff this weekend. We have the Thunder. We have the marathon is Sunday.
Yeah.
You've run the half marathon, and we were just talking beforehand. The emotion that you see at the finish line stuff. What's the best thing for you? I mean, you've covered this for a long time. What's the best thing about the marathon?
Yeah, this is year 17 for the marathon. It started 5 years after the bombing, so a lot of things had come to pass in terms of the memorial and those sorts of things. For the memorial, this is their one and only fundraiser. They don't get funding from a lot of, they don't get any federal funding for sure. And so this is a big fundraiser for them. It's raised over $1 million for the memorial for several years now, which is a significant amount for them. So this is a big event. I believe 25,000 is the number that we'll see running through the streets of Oklahoma City on Sunday. 26.2 miles for the marathoners and the relays. The half marathoners will go 13:1. The kids will go a mile 2, so they'll finish up a marathon having done the first 25 miles away from the event on Sunday. But it's just, to me, it's a fun day. It's a day that, you've got people that are coming to this event from a variety of backgrounds. You've got some people that have close ties to the bombing. You've got survivors. You've got family members. I even had a chance to catch up with a family that's coming to run in honor of a bombing victim whose kidney ended up going to the matriarch of the family, had a kidney transplant, and they're coming to do the 5K about about 40 members of that family coming to remember their mom, their grandma, aunt, but also to remember the bombing victim that really enabled their mom to have a longer life. So you've got all these different connections, and you've got people that are coming because of health. They've lost weight, or they're trying to get healthy, and so they're doing events that way. So there's as many stories as there are people out there, and they actually run right by our building here, which is early in the race, so everybody's happy and excited, and you see them at all different points along the race, and there's the joy, but there's also the struggle, and people just really kind of gutting it out at different points. But then to see the racers coming down Broadway, which is the final stretch as they come home to the finish line, it's a ton of fun. I mean, people sprinting those last couple of blocks, and just really getting that adrenaline rush. So it'll be interesting to see. The emotion will always be there, but it'll be interesting to see with the weather. There's a chance of rain. The wind will be up. It's Oklahoma. Hello. Of course, the wind will be up. So it'll be interesting to see sort of how that affects runners out there as they navigate this course on Sunday.
It's great to see. I mean, it certainly brings the community together. The thing I'm always impressed by is there is no, marathoners have no particular look, because I got to admit, they come in all shapes and sizes. I've seen, they do run by our house, and I've seen even at the front of the pack, you'll have guys who are, of course, what you would imagine the marathoners, those long, thin, light, bird-like looking fellows. But then you'll see, like in 10th place will come, some 6'4", 230 guys. Like,
muscle bound
how
or
is
something.
He doing that?
Yeah,
how
I know.
are they doing that?
And that's really one of the kind of cool things I think about the marathon. One of the reasons I like this event so much is, we have events in the state where you've got, some of the best athletes on the planet when NBA teams are playing at the peak. I mean, obviously, but this is an event where you've got elite level runners, as you mentioned, Phil, some of those guys and gals at the front that, are going to run 26.2 miles in less than 3 hours. I mean, that's just mind-boggling to me, just the speed with which they can go. But then this is an event where those runners are on the same course as anybody who wants to pay the money to go.
Yeah.
So if you've trained and it's going to be a sub 4-hour marathon, if you've trained and you're going to need to be out there for 6 or 7 hours, you're on the same course as these people who might go run Boston, who might go run New York, who might, win the race. So to me, that's one of the really cool aspects. If you're willing to do the training, if you're willing to pay the money, you can be on the same course as some of these elite athletes and cross the same finish line as them. Maybe a few hours later, but still the same finish line.
Graham, you gonna run it?
No.
Ever?
I don't think so.
No, you're out. Ben?
No.
I don't know the full. A half is maybe a goal at some point. I mean, it would be kind of cool to be out there. I mean, you kind of get that other perspective of I just think it's cool just to be able to go through all the different neighborhoods and just kind of get that perspective.
I would say for people that aren't ready to run quite yet or aren't going to participate, go down towards the start-finish area on Sunday. The starting line is roughly Northwest 6th and Harvey, so to the west of the memorial. The finish line is over on Broadway to the east of the memorial, but in between there's tons of stuff going on. If you want, after some runners start to finish, you can trickle back over to the memorial area. A lot of people will go back over there, leave medals, leave bibs, leave tokens on the chairs there at the memorial. It's really an unbelievable community event. Phil, you mentioned out on the course. A lot of people have really embraced the nature of this race. Our Adam Kemp's going to be out on race day sort of talking with people that are having, essentially driveway parties or, have sort of just taken a hold of this event. But it really is a great day to remember, to celebrate, the lives that were lost, to remember those, but to celebrate the way this community has come together, can come together. It's really unique. I don't think there's a whole lot of other events out there that you'll find that are able to combine those two things.
Agreed. Well, listen, that's the kind of stuff, that's the kind of information, the news, the gossip, the fun stuff. We can learn about Jenny's 13.1 mile run later. We'll be back to probably talk about that and how long it took to recover. We'll learn why Ben isn't going to run, why Graham has no desire to run. But if they had, I would have been at the end of the driveway with a beer for you
Waiting.
at mile
Appreciate
26.
that.
Maybe I will run.
At mile 26.
Suddenly,
if you get there,
you're
I'm there.
interested.
Pick up a paper, check us out online, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I think you'll enjoy what you find. Check back with us next week. Thanks a lot.